Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 717, and today is November 25th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Now, for anyone who missed it last week, I had been teasing a huge announcement, which I announced on Friday, and that was I have launched an all-new show, the Kyle Anzalone Show, and this show is backed by a production team, so it's really awesome quality. Everybody who so far has checked out the first episode has given me great feedback. Of course, we're going to continue to improve and work, and it's, an all new thing, so it's only going to get better with time. But for everybody who's in the audience right now, please, if you can, head on over to YouTube and subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone channel and watch the first episode, what's really happening in Ukraine right now, plus Netanyahu's ICC arrest warrant. That is the first episode of the show. Again, everybody who's watching it is giving me excellent feedback, so I think you all will really like it. And then while you're there, be sure to subscribe to the show, like the show, as it's a new channel. It does need help getting off the ground, and you all could really help me do that. And then with that, I just want to mention to people, because there seemed to be some confusion for people on X, I am not getting rid of conflicts of interest. For now, the plan is to continue to do 5 shows a week, and it will either be an episode every day of conflicts of interest or the Kyle Anzalone Show. So you will still be getting plenty of content. It's just some of the shows will be of a little bit better quality than others, which is just myself running everything here, not only doing the show, but also behind the scenes, switching articles, scrolling through the articles. All that's done by myself as I'm recording. And so it's really nice having a whole team to help me put these shows together and make it look as good as the Kyle Anzalone Show does. So with that, be sure you're subscribing, not only to this channel, but the Kyle Anzalone channel. Follow everything I do either at the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com, or on my Twitter handle at @KyleAnzalone_. And if you want to subscribe to this show, you can always do it just by following it wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, now let's get into the news today. The first story up here that I want to talk about is a story that I wrote for antiwar.com on Friday. So the headline of that article is Report, U.S. and European officials discussing giving Ukraine nuclear weapons. So I write, according to the New York Times, U.S. and European officials have discussed a range of options they believe will deter Russia from taking more Ukrainian territory, including providing Kiev with nuclear weapons. The outlet reports that Western officials believe the Kremlin will not significantly escalate the war before Donald Trump is sworn in as president in January. So following the election of Trump earlier this month, the U.S. and its NATO allies began taking steps to rush weapons to Ukraine and give Kiev the ability to strike targets inside Russian territory with long-range weapons. And we've talked about this on the show. This is their effort to Trump-proof the war in Ukraine by making it impossible for him to unwind. The war is at such a high escalation that Ukraine has weapons to fight for months and months and months. And this is going to stop Trump from coming into office and doing what he pledged to the American people, what he was elected on, and that was ending the war in Ukraine. So American officials were briefed on it. The intelligence community's assessment told the Times that the weapons will not alter the challenging situation Kiev is currently facing. The Times reported, quote, U.S. spy agencies have assessed that speeding up the provision of weapons, ammunition, and material for Ukraine will do little to change the course of the war in the short term. Now, we already knew this, of course, just by watching what's happened during the war, as the West has escalated its support for its proxy war against Russia by flooding Ukraine with more advanced weapons, so Abrams tanks, F-16s, ATACMS with the longer range, potentially talking about transferring the JASSMs to Ukraine. All of those decisions have also had, a reciprocal escalation in Moscow, and that has caused Russia to take more and more Ukrainian territory. And so these weapons haven't necessarily helped the Ukrainian side because they provoked Russia to take a harder and more violent stand in the war, which in turn has led to the death of more Ukrainians and the taking of more Ukrainian territory by Russia. So, desperate to bolster Ukraine's standing in the war before the transition of power on January 20th, the Biden administration is looking at a range of serious escalations. So, the article explains U.S. and European officials are discussing deterrence as a possible security guarantee for Ukraine, such as stockpiling a conventional arsenal sufficient to strike a punishing blow if Russia would violate a ceasefire. Several officials even suggested that Mr. Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the Soviet Union. According to some officials who spoke with the Times, the administration believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin won't significantly escalate the war until Trump returns to the Oval Office. The article says, but the escalation risk of allowing Ukraine to strike Russia with U.S.-supplied weaponry has diminished with the election of Mr. Trump. Biden administration officials believe, calculating that Putin of Russia knows he has to only wait 2 months for the new administration. That assessment is based on the belief that Trump and his incoming Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, will take a more favorable stance towards Russia. However, Trump proved to be a Russia hawk during his first administration by ramping up sanctions on Moscow, providing lethal arms to Ukraine, and expelling a large number of Russian diplomats from the U.S. In September, Putin said he preferred Vice President Kamala Harris to win the White House. He also previously said he preferred Biden and Hillary. He said Trump has impose as many sanctions on Russia as any president has ever imposed before, and if Harris is doing well, perhaps she will refrain from such actions. Putin explained in September, much of the American political class has cast Trump and Gabbard as agents of Russia. However, extensive investigations into Trump ties with the Kremlin have come up empty. Additionally, the Times reported last week that there was no evidence Gabbard was in any way an asset of Vladimir Putin. And so this is a huge provocation and, a massive worry. I think this combined with that story we talked about last week where the Ukrainian government was floating trying to make a nuclear weapon, or they commissioned, a think tank just barely outside of the Ukrainian government to go ahead and commission a report on if they should or shouldn't go ahead and make nuclear weapons. And so there seems to be a lot of talk about Kiev obtaining nuclear weapons. I think the real concern here is that if Putin thinks these threats are serious and thinks that there's a real possibility that there could be a nuclear weapon in Kiev, I think he will rush to deliver that weapon first, just on the tip of a missile, right? Like he's going to conduct, this is something that would provoke Putin to conduct a nuclear strike on Kiev. These are serious provocations that I do think are going to have serious reactions from the Kremlin. I don't think that Putin is willing to just take all these on the chin, knowing that Donald Trump is going to come into office in January. In fact, I think Putin may see that Trump, being somebody who likes to drive a hard bargain, is going to see this as a position of, oh, now Russia needs to concede more. And so Putin may take some significant steps to escalate this war before the election. I don't think he'll necessarily move to nuclear weapons unless the West or Kiev does first. But, they're talking about putting a huge conventional arsenal in Ukraine. I assume that he will rain down a huge conventional missile barrage on Ukraine first. All right, next up here. This one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on the 24th. Former Ukrainian commander of forces says World War III has begun. As the West escalates its support for Ukraine, Kiev's former top military commander warned that World War III is already underway. At the same time, a high-ranking British military officer said the UK was ready to fight a war with Russia and Eastern Europe. So former military commander-in-chief and Ukraine's current ambassador to the UK, Zaluzhny, made the dire statements in an interview with Politico published on Thursday. Quote, I believe that in 2024, we can absolutely believe that the Third World War has begun. Zaluzhny argued that Chinese, Iranian, and North Korean support for Russia supported his statement. He explained, it's obvious that Ukraine has already too many enemies. Ukraine will survive with technology, but it's not clear whether it can win this battle alone. As the war has continued for nearly 3 years, Moscow has formed stronger economic partnerships with China and other countries such as India, and ramped up its military ties with Pyongyang and Tehran. Kiev has relied on massive support from Washington and its allies to wage the war. The U.S. has provided nearly $200 billion in aid to Ukraine, with tens of billions coming from other NATO members. Western nations have significantly increased that support since Donald Trump won the election earlier this month. President Joe Biden has authorized Ukraine to use long-range American missiles to strike deep inside Russia and approved sending Kiev landmines. Russian President Vladimir Putin has responded to the escalations by firing new intermediate-range hypersonic missiles into Ukraine, and he warned that Russia has the right to target military facilities in countries that provide Ukraine with long-range weapons for strikes on Russian territory. So Rob Magawan, the deputy chief of British Defense Staff, noted that the high tensions in Europe could result in a larger war. He told the House of Commons Defense Committee, "I don't think anybody in this room should be under any illusion. If the Russians invaded Eastern Europe tonight, then we would meet them in that fight." All right, let's talk about how these provocations are going and how significant these escalations are. This next one, France says Ukraine can fire French long-range missiles into Russia. So the French foreign minister, Barat, said in an interview published on Saturday that Ukraine could fire French-provided long-range missiles into Russian territory following U.S. and U.K. authorization of such strikes. France has provided Ukraine with its version of the British Storm Shadow missile, also known as Scalp, which have a range of about 155 miles. The foreign minister told the BBC that there are no red lines when it comes to France's support for Ukraine, and that Ukrainian forces could fire missiles into Russia in the logics of self-defense. He said that principle has been set. Our message to Zelensky has been well received. It's unclear if Ukraine has yet fired the French-provided Scalp missiles into Russia. Last week, Ukrainian forces used both British Storm Shadow missiles and U.S.-provided ATACMS, which have a range of about 190 miles, in strikes on Russian territory. Russian President Vladimir Putin responded to escalations by firing a new intermediate-range hypersonic ballistic missile into Ukraine. He also issued a stark warning saying Russia has the right to target military facilities of any country that's providing Ukraine with long-range weapons for strikes on Russian territory. We consider ourselves entitled to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our facilities. If anyone else doubts this, then they are wrong. There will always be a response. Putin made clear back in September that he would view NATO-supported long-range strikes as direct NATO involvement in the war and ordered changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine as a warning to the West. But President Biden ignored those warnings as his administration is looking to escalate the proxy war as much as possible before Trump returns to office. All right, let's move over to the Middle East. We have quite a lot to talk about when it comes to Israel. First off, let's talk about silencing dissent. And I think this is so important because a lot of times when we hear why we have to support Israel, well, it's the only democracy in the Middle East and they share our Christian Judeo values, which basically means, look, in a lot of the Middle East, people don't have a freedom of speech. Women have limited rights compared to men. The age of consent for marriage is lower in a lot of countries. There's just all these different things. Homosexuality is allowed in the West. It's not in some of these Middle Eastern countries. And so, we kind of get this view in the United States that essentially every country is Saudi Arabia, where in Saudi Arabia from, 2015, 2014, where women can't get driver's license, women can't leave the house without a male escort, that, women had to wear the full burqas all the time. That even for men, there's limited freedom of speech. There's a lot of even public executions. This is, I think, Americans' large perception of the Middle East, with the exception of Israel, which we view as a country that doesn't do any of those things. And To some extent, there's some truth to it. On the other hand, the Palestinians who live in what territory Israel has drawn their borders around, which includes the West Bank and Gaza, live as second, third class citizens, live in an apartheid state. I want to just mention here this because this is what, this group of people we're talking about aren't the millions of people that live in the West Bank, aren't the 2 million people that live in Gaza. These are the 2 million Palestinians who are citizens of Israel. And so this is the AP reporting on Israel's crackdown on their, what should be their freedom of speech. So the AP reports, Israel's year-long crackdown against Palestinian citizens who speak out against the war in Gaza is prompting many to self-censor out of fear of being jailed and further marginalized in society, while some find ways to dissent but very carefully. Israeli authorities have opened more incitement cases against Palestinian citizens during this war in Gaza than in the previous 5-year combined. Records show. Israeli authorities have also said that in many cases ended in convictions and imprisonment. The Justice Ministry said that it doesn't have statistics on those convictions, so that they're just kind of hiding how many Palestinians are being rounded up and jailed in this way. Just being charged with incitement to terrorism or identified with a terrorist group can land a suspect in detention until they're sentenced under the terms of a 2016 law. And so, a right to a fair and speedy trial doesn't exist in Israel. Miranda rights don't exist in Israel. If you're a Palestinian, you could just be scooped up, thrown in jail under administrative detention for months, if not years at a time, without ever getting a trial. And this is true if you're a child as well. Children are not accepted from these brutal apartheid punishments. So in addition to being charged as criminals, Palestinian citizens of Israel, who make up around 20% of the country's population, have lost jobs, been suspended from schools, and facing police interrogations for posting online or demonstrating, activists and rights watchdogs say. It's had a chilling effect. So the task force led by Itamar Ben-Gvir, who the AP describes as a hardline national security minister, but is somebody who openly advocates for apartheid, the expelling of Palestinians from Israel, just open ethnic cleansing, a true monster. So his office said the task force has monitored thousands of posts allegedly expressing support for terrorist organizations, and that his police arrested hundreds of terror supporters, including public opinion leaders, social media figures, religious figures, teachers, and others. Freedom of speech is not the freedom to incite, which harms public safety and our security, his office said in the statement. But activists and rights groups say the government has expanded its definition of incitement too far, targeting legitimate opinions that are at the core of freedom of expression. And so again, if Palestinians don't have the right of freedom of speech, there's really not freedom of speech in Israel, because the Israelis aren't well, I mean, some of them are protesting, demanding Netanyahu accept the hostage deal, but the true dissent to the Israeli apartheid policies come from the Palestinians. Now, Israel is also cracking down on Haaretz, which is the one media outlet in Israel that occasionally reports in a way that isn't extremely biased towards the Palestinians. So Middle East Eye reports the Israeli government approved a proposal on Sunday, directing all government-funded organizations to cease communications with Haaretz and withdraw advertisements from the newspaper. In response, Haaretz released a statement on Sunday saying, quote, the opportunist resolution to boycott Haaretz, which passed in today's government meeting without any legal review, is another step in Netanyahu's journey to dismantle Israel's democracy. Like his friends Putin, Erdogan, and Orban, Netanyahu is trying to silence a critical independent newspaper. Haaretz will not bulk and will not morph into a government pamphlet that punishes messages approved by the government and its leaders. So again, these are major things that really censor what is happening in Israel. And a part of that is because there's a genocide going on and Israel wants to control the narrative. This is an article from Haaretz that I quote here. Photos show Jabalia near totally destroyed. So Haaretz reports the refugee camp, thought to be Gaza's largest, has been almost totally destroyed by the Israeli military activity. Recently published satellite photos of Jabalia showed the humanitarian situation in the refugee camp located in northern Gaza continues to deteriorate. Photos indicate that the area, which more than 160,000 refugees lived in very crowded conditions, is no longer habitable, showing tens of thousands of homes destroyed or heavily damaged in essential infrastructure in ruins. Satellite pictures from last month showed shelters for the displaced buildings, which are now gone. Accompanying the obliteration of Jabalia's houses has been the area's transformation into a vital enclave of the military, which seems to be systematically flattening whatever buildings remains. Reports from Jabalia say Israeli airstrikes and ground combat have been concentrated on very dense residential areas, including centers run by UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinians. The satellite photos show buildings that have been leveled down to their foundations. Many residents have fled, but sources in rescue teams say there are between hundreds and tens of thousands dead beneath the ruins. According to reports, the destruction also included damage to the local UNRWA aid center, which was used to distribute food and other humanitarian aid. The destruction of the aid center buildings can be seen in the satellite photos. And so there's a bunch of photos in the article if you want to go and look through, but essentially it's what we've seen in Gaza time and time again, which is there were once houses and other infrastructure in an area, and now there's absolutely none. First done in by Israeli bombs and other mortar fire, tank rounds, things like that, and eventually destroyed by Israeli military construction crews using bulldozers and excavators. All right, next up, we have this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Hamas says female Israeli hostage was killed by Israeli airstrike. So on Saturday, Hamas's armed wing, the Al-Qassams Brigade, said Israeli airstrikes in northern Gaza killed a female hostages. The Al-Qassams Brigade spokesman said Hamas reestablished contact with the unit that was holding the hostage after several weeks, and that it was confirmed the Israeli woman was killed in an area north Gaza where the Israeli military had been operating. The spokesman said that another female captive held in the same area was at risk of dying. He added that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders are fully responsible for the lives of the Israeli captives. The Israeli military said it couldn't confirm or refute the claim, and that it was investigating the situation after Hamas released footage allegedly showing a hostage who had been killed. There are believed to be 97 Israeli hostages in Gaza, and the Israeli military has confirmed that at least 37 have been killed. Israeli media reported back in September that Netanyahu told the Knesset committee that only half the hostages were believed to be alive, and so that number is obviously going to continue to go down. Netanyahu has been under pressure from hostage family members to agree to a deal with Hamas, but he has worked to sabotage the chances of an agreement during previous negotiations. Earlier this month, Netanyahu fired Yoav Gallant from his post as defense minister. Gallant had been calling for a hostage deal for months and had said after his firing that there was no need for Israeli troops to remain in Gaza. He said, "There's nothing left in Gaza to do. The major achievements have been achieved. I fear we are staying there just because there is a desire to stay there." All right. So, one more here from Dave DeCamp. Israel reiterates it wants freedom. Oh, wrong article. Give me a second. All right. Apologies about that. We got the right article up here now. And just, one of the reasons why I'm so happy to have the Kyle Anzalone show up and running now, so I don't have to worry about setting all these articles myself before the show. All right, this one from Dave DeCamp, November 24th, antiwar.com. Israeli troops help settlers leader enter Gaza to scout land for settlements. So Israeli troops helped an Israeli settler scout locations for a potential Jewish settlement in the Gaza Strip, Israeli media reported on Friday. According to the Times of Israel, Daniela Weiss, the leader of the extremist movement, was touring the Israeli side of the Gaza border on November 13th with a group of people. The group eventually made its way into northern Gaza somehow, and Weiss contacted Israeli soldiers she knew who sent a jeep to pick him up. The Israeli soldiers took the group of settlers to a site that was a Jewish settlement before 2005 disengagement in the Nazarene Corridor, a strip of land that is controlled by the Israeli military and that separates northern Gaza from the rest of the strip. The IDF has bulldozed just about every building in the corridor, which is expanding, making it a potential location for future settlements. The Israeli report said that the soldiers transported Weiss without the knowledge of their superiors. They drove Weiss and her group out of the strip through an unofficial crossing to avoid being questioned by other security forces. In response to the reports, the Israeli military said Weiss's entrance into the Gaza Strip is unknown and was not approved by the proper avenues. If the incident took place, it's illegal and against protocol and will be handled accordingly. Weiss has previously said that she has about 740 families ready to move into Gaza. In comments to the Israeli Khan broadcaster, Weiss said that she's planning to set up settlements near Israeli military bases in Gaza that she thinks will be eventually recognized by the government, the same strategy that settlers have used in the West Bank. Weiss said, "How will we enter a military base? There's all sorts of creative ideas. So here you have a tent, and next to that tent there is a structure, and next to that there is a kitchen, and next to that there are kids," and so it goes on. She also signaled that an attempt to establish settlements might start soon. "We're no longer getting ready to go in. The movement we can enter, we enter." She added that if 300 people enter at once, the military would have difficulty kicking them out. The idea of reestablishing Jewish settlements in Gaza is popular among many Israeli ministers and members of the Knesset who recently attended a Resettle Gaza conference that was organized by Weiss's movement and members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. At the conference, Weiss made it clear that she wanted to settle all of Gaza and for the Palestinians to be expelled. All right, last up here on today's show, Blinken declares Venezuelan opposition figure winner of July presidential election. And so I wrote this one for the Libertarian Institute on November 20th. Secretary of State Antony Blinken declared on Twitter that Edmundo Gonzalez won the Venezuelan presidential election several months ago. It's unclear if Washington's position will make a difference as Gonzalez lives outside of Venezuela. On Tuesday, Blinken posted, "The Venezuelan people spoke resoundingly on July 28th and made Gonzalez the presidential-elect. Democracy demands respect for the will of the voters." Gonzalez currently lives in Spain. In August, about a week after the election, Blinken made a similar statement saying that Gonzalez won the election by an insurmountable margin. The secretary based that conclusion on a report by the Carter Center. Blinken claimed the institution was independent. That claim is false as the Carter Center is funded by multiple U.S. government agencies, including Blinken's State Department. At the time, it was not clear if Blinken's statement represented administration policy, as the National Security Council spokesman, John Kirby, said the White House would withhold judgment until electoral authorities published a full, detailed tabulation of the votes. Additionally, a State Department spokesman said Washington was not ready to declare a winner of the Venezuelan election. The U.S. has attempted to overthrow Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his predecessor Hugo Chavez several times. However, Caracas has foiled Washington's coup attempts. During the first Donald Trump administration, Special Representative for Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, led a similar effort to overthrow Maduro by recognizing Juan Guaido as president. That scheme also failed. The second Trump administration may make similar attempts at regime change in Caracas, as Marco Rubio, the nominee to be Secretary of State, is a longtime supporter of overthrowing Maduro. Following the July election, Rubio called for the military to overthrow the sitting president. Quote, "The military must stand up and defend the people against the regime," he posted on X. So, from one Venezuela hawk to the Nets, the State Department likely to remain unchanged on that issue. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. Just one last reminder, one last request. If you haven't done so already, please head on over to the Kyle Anzalone channel and subscribe. I will put a link in the show notes page to make that as easy as possible. Please take 30 seconds to do that for me. It will really help out the channel, get like its legs under it, get some good growth, and you're not going to be disappointed. The show is fantastic. The team I'm working with is fantastic. They're already taking clips, making shorts for me. It's really a great start. I'm very happy with it. So please head on over and check out the all new Kyle Anzalone show. Thanks, everyone.